Our world is changing quickly, and in order for us to stand together and make good decisions, we need accurate, timely information. But science, especially climate science, is being repressed and politicized. Those who speak out are targeted and risk losing everything. It is with gratitude that I introduce to you author, activist, grief recovery specialist, and award-winning Professor Emeritus of the Natural Resources and Ecology and Evolutionary Biology from the University of Arizona. Please welcome Guy McPherson.
Thank you, Dwayne. Thanks to Dwayne and Kathy for feeding me and giving me a place to rest my head tonight. Thanks especially to all of you for showing up. Enlightenment, which is what I intend to bring you today, is a destructive process. It is horrifying. It is horrible what I'm about to say. In order to learn something of any importance, I think we have to start by unlearning some of the things that we already know. And I think as a result, learning things is very uncomfortable. Learning things of importance. Learning the timetables is not so tough. That's not uncomfortable at all. Learning important matters can be shattering. I left active service at the University of Arizona at the age of 49, 7 years and 17 days ago. And I did that in order to pursue a different way of life. In part because universities are part of a corporate culture that dominates the way we live. And I've learned and unlearned a lot between then and now. And along the way, mine has become the leading voice of abrupt climate change. So we're not talking about climate change, not really. We're not talking about the Al Gore style inconvenient truth climate change. The film came out just over 10 years ago. I think it was 10 years ago this week. And we're not talking about something that can be solved with squirrely light bulbs and electric cars. We are in an insoluble situation. We have triggered too many self-reinforcing feedback loops that are irreversible at temporal spans of relevance to humans. The United Nations, after all, predicted disaster 27 years ago. If we didn't fix things, we didn't solve the problem within 10 years, climate change will spiral beyond human control. So, just a little shy of 17 years ago, we needed to have this problem fixed. Now it's not a problem anymore, it's a predicament. Problems have answers. Math books have problems in them, you turn to the back and there's the answer. Predicaments don't have solutions. We are in an insoluble situation. And we have been for a long time. We are in the midst of abrupt climate change. These are the 3 warmest years on record, 2010, 2014, and 2015 in that order until 2016 came along. 2016 blows away all previous records. Each of the last 12 months has been the warmest month on record for that month. And April, which isn't shown here, we only have January, February, March, but April has come in since then and has continued the trend with actually the 12th month in a row that broke global temperature records. And it broke the record for the month of April by the largest margin ever relative to those previous 11 months. Things have clearly spun beyond human control. And the artists, in my experience, are the ones who understand that first. You can't talk to a scientist about this, certainly not somebody who looks like me, by which I mean a white scientist, a white male scientist. They will always propose solutions. We can always fix this, except sometimes we can't. So here's an artist who actually gets it. This episode of The Newsroom, which appeared on HBO for 3 seasons. This episode appeared in November 2014, the second of 3 seasons of The Newsroom. It's written by Aaron Sorkin, and I'm just going to play 4 minutes from it, and then talk about what we know about the situation since then.
So there won't be any hard questions. I'm just going to ask you to expand on the report. Pretend you're an expert witness, and I'm your lawyer.
Sounds good.
With a growing
Intent.
consensus among
Stand by
environmental
camera
experts
one.
that the 450 parts per million will soon be crossed, the question remains, how will we respond?
And joining us now in studio is Richard Westbrook, Deputy Assistant Administrator of the EPA. Welcome.
Thank you.
Mr. Westbrook, you've spent most of your professional career as a climate scientist in the public sector.
Yes, 10 years as a supervisory management analyst in the Office of Environmental Information. And before that, I was a program specialist in the EPA's Resource Management Division.
And you have a PhD in climate science from Stanford.
Yes, and another in chemistry with a master's in biology.
Okay. Tell us about the findings in the report that was just released.
The latest measurements taken at Mauna Loa in Hawaii indicate a CO2 level of 400 parts per million.
Just so we know what we're talking about, if you were a doctor and we were the patient, what's your prognosis? 1,000 years, 2,000 years?
A person has already been born who will die due to catastrophic failure of the planet.
What did he just say?
Okay, can you expand on that?
Sure. The last time there was this much CO2 in the air, the oceans were 80 feet higher than they are now. Two things you should know. Half the world's population lives within 120 miles of an ocean.
And the other?
Humans can't breathe underwater.
You're saying the situation's dire.
Not exactly. Your house is burning to the ground, the situation's dire. Your house has already burned to the ground. Situation's over.
So what can we do to reverse this?
Well, there's a lot we could do.
Good.
If it were 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, but now, no.
Can you make an analogy that might help us understand?
Sure. It's as if you're sitting in your car, in your garage, with the engine running and the door closed, and you've slipped into unconsciousness, and that's it.
What if someone comes and opens the door?
You're already dead.
What if the person got there in time?
You need to be safe.
Okay, so now what's the CO2 equivalent of the getting there in time?
Shutting off the car 20 years ago.
You sound like you're saying it's hopeless.
Yeah.
Is that the administration's position or yours?
There isn't a position on this any more than there's a position on the temperature at which water boils.
The administration, let me try to, your administration.
And don't forget, I need you to
supports wind and
stretch.
solar, clean coal, nuclear power, raising fuel economy standards, and building a more efficient electrical grid.
Yes.
And
That would have been great.
let's see if we can't find a better spin. People are starting their weekends. The report says we can release 565 more gigatons of CO2 without the effects being
It
calamitous.
says we can only release 565 gigatons.
So what if we only release 564?
Well, then we would have a reasonable shot at some form of dystopian post-apocalyptic life. But the carbon dioxide in oil that we've already released is 2,795 gigatons. So,
What would all this look like?
well, mass migrations, food and water shortages, spread of deadly disease, endless wildfires, way too many to keep under control. Storms that have the power to level cities, blacken out the sky, and create permanent darkness.
Are you going to get in trouble for saying this publicly?
Who cares?
Mr. Westbrook, we want to inform people, but we don't want to alarm them. Can you give us a reason to be optimistic?
Well, that's the thing. Well, Americans are optimistic by nature. And if we face this problem head on, if we listen to our best scientists and act decisively and passionately, I still don't see any way we can survive.
Okay, Richard Westbrook, Deputy Assistant Administrator of the EPA. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That's not me. I'm way more tired than he is.
What year was that EPA report?
2014, it actually came out right before the, and he's not referring to an EPA report, he's actually referring to the U.S. National Report on Climate Change.
Put out
Came out in
by-
2014, put out by the, I don't recall which branch of government it was, what specific entity, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't the EPA. He did point out that we have, at the last time that we had this level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the sea level was 80 feet higher than it is today, 23 meters. Actually, he's referring to 385 parts per million, even though he says 400 parts per million. So the last time there were 385 parts per million, as reported by the Alliance of Small Island States, right before COP15 in Copenhagen. The last time there were 385 parts per million carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, the seas were 23 meters higher and the global average temperature was 6 degrees Celsius warmer than it is right now. So we have those locked in based on reality, not based on models, based on previous events in planetary history. He talked about mass migrations as something that would happen in the future, and we are not seeing migrations, and we won't see migrations. We are seeing a refugee crisis. Migrants move one way, and then they move back. Migratory birds do not move one way and then not go back. They're migratory. They go south in the winter, they move back north in the summer. Like some people we know. They're migrants. People are not leaving Africa or Europe, the Middle East, small island states in the South Pacific, including the 5 islands and the Solomon Islands that have disappeared. They're not leaving and then planning to come back. They're leaving because there's no habitat for humans there. They are refugees. They are not migrants. This is not something that will happen in the future. This is something that is happening right now. And it has been happening for a while. Food and water shortages, check and check. These things are already underway. People are leaving the Middle East and Northern Africa because they are unable to grow food anymore. You think they want to go to places where they're not welcome? Do you think they want to go to Western Europe? I toured Western Europe last year about this time. And the sentiment among most people I encountered in Western Europe was that those people should go back to where they came from. They're not welcome here. It was a Donald Trump style response to too many people coming into habitat that's already full. They don't want to go, but they can no longer live where they used to live. So they're abandoning their homes of generations because they are not capable of growing food there anymore. The habitat no longer exists for them. The spread of deadly diseases clearly is already underway. Malaria, dengue, Lyme, Zika. I was teaching about the first 3 of these on the list, malaria, dengue, and Lyme, 15 years ago in my courses when I would talk about climate change. It's something that will happen in the future. Well, they're no longer happening in the future. They're happening now. Zika got real for Americans when the first American died from complications associated with Zika a week ago, approximately. And more recently than that, there's a yellow fever epidemic that is coming our way. I thought we did away with all that with modern medicine. They're back with a vengeance. Endless wildfires. Most of us are familiar with Fort McMurray in the midst of the tar sands, where more than 88,000 people have been evacuated in a span of about 3 days when the fire came there. And it looks like the tar sands themselves are at risk of catching on fire, which is going to be really pretty inconvenient. And it's pretty evident that we're in a new era at this point, the era of superfires. We've heard about the fires close to home that are affecting people who look like us. But most of us have not heard about East Asia, where there are at least 3 fires the size of Rhode Island or larger. Most of us have not heard about the fires in Russia, in Siberia, that are super fires that have outstripped the ability of humans to manage them, to control them. But it's pretty evident, even in the absence of that information, that we have entered the arena of fires being too big to control. And we're also in the midst of superstorms. So most of us are familiar with Katrina and thought it was a one-time thing. It was the storm of the millennium, or maybe the storm of the century. And then we got Sandy a couple of years later, and then Haiyan, Winston, and Patricia have come in the last 3 years, respectively. And each of these is a superstorm, the kind that is only supposed to happen once every century or every millennium. And now it's every year. They haven't yet created permanent darkness. But if you were in New Orleans more than 10 years ago when Katrina hit, You would have thought it was going to last forever. It seemed like a very long time, and people's lives were disrupted in a tremendous way for an extended period of time. Now, I'm frequently asked, and it was the first question I received tonight before most of you arrived, how long do we have? I don't know your expiration date, just to be clear. I've thought for a long time it should come on your birth certificate, just so you know. Or stamped on your butt, so you just check. Oh, I only have 4 days. I better get to living already. So I don't know when you're going to die. I don't know when human extinction will occur. I suspect it's sooner than most people can possibly imagine. I used to give a date, and people would get all hung up on the date. So if I said, for example, that human extinction will occur by 2030, then everybody listening to me would go, okay, midnight, December 31st, 2029, I'm going to die in my sleep. There will be no consequences for me between now and then. Well, the consequences are already affecting a lot of people. 5 million people die every year as a result of climate change. 4 billion people don't have access to daily potable water. 4 billion people on the planet. That's more than half the people on the planet. When will it affect you? I don't know. But I suspect it will be faster than expected. In any event, large swaths of the Pacific Ocean may actually suffocate in just 15 years, according to a recent headline, as early as the 2030s. That's going to be inconvenient, since that's where we get half of our food is from the ocean. The other half comes from terrestrial systems, from land. And this rancher gave these livestock plenty of water. They didn't die from lack of water. They didn't die from overheating. They died for the same reason that many people are going to die in the not-too-distant future. They died for the same reason that many people are already dying, because there's no food. There's nothing for them to eat. When you have 7.4 billion people on a planet, and you suddenly reach the realization that we can't have infinite growth on a finite planet, that like every other species, ours will run out of substrate. In our case, that includes food and water and the ability to keep our body temperature within a certain range. Then you realize that we too are actually going to go extinct, just like every other species before us. And it will result almost certainly from lack of habitat. Very, very few species go extinct because they're hunted to death. Almost all go extinct because of loss of habitat. Currently, 150 to 200 species a day are driven to extinction. That's from an August 2010 report by the United Nations. So it's undoubtedly conservative because it was more than 5 years ago, and because it came from the United Nations. That species hasn't included us yet. For a long time, climate scientists believe that the ability to grow grains, the basis of civilization, would be seriously compromised at 2 degrees Celsius above baseline. We passed the 1.5 degree mark, as indicated with this previous slide, early this year. And so the headline at Truthout in an article written by Dar Jamail is Agriculture on the Brink, and I think a more accurate headline would have been Civilization on the Brink, because civilization depends upon the ability to grow grains. That's what gets us through the, quote, hard times. That's what allows us to have food in the grocery stores, is we're able to store grain and make the bread months or years down the road. So civilization is on the brink, and because of global dimming, or the lack of global dimming associated with industrial activity, when civilization goes away, the planet will experience a very rapid rise in global average temperature. A little bit more about that later. I'm going to talk about one of 65 self-reinforcing feedback loops that I know about. One of 65. And that's moistening of the upper troposphere. The upper troposphere is found between 8,000 and 13,000 meters, between 8 and 13 kilometers, and if you have your calculator on your phone handy, you can actually do the math. I think that's somewhere between 26,000 and 43,000 feet, more or less. So up in this portion of the atmosphere where almost all of the water vapor ends up, almost all the water vapor that evaporates off this planet ends up, in the upper troposphere. We have only relatively recently observed this self-reinforcing feedback loop occurring in the upper troposphere. And the paper in Skeptical Science from less than a year ago indicates when other feedback loops are included, and there are 64 others that I know about, including atmospheric methane going exponential, for example. When we include those, the total warming from potential 1 degree C change caused by CO2 in reality is as much as 3 degrees, and we're at just over 1.5 now. From here on out, I'm going to take a conservative approach and indicate that we're up over 1.5, and so I'm going to settle at 1.5. And say we've triggered 1.5 degrees Celsius global average temperature rise instead of the slightly more than that we're at now. And only focus on this one very conservative source. There are less conservative sources not in the journal literature that predict a much more rapid rise in temperature in the near future. But I'm going to stay with this conservative approach. Because of the lack of global dimming, and let me explain that briefly, in addition to industrial activity, such as firing up our internal combustion engines and turning on the lights that cause the coal-fired power plant to generate electricity, and all those other things we do through industry, as a result of those activities, we not only put greenhouse gases up in the sky that serve as blankets, that serve as warming factors, that trap heat down here on Earth. We not only do that, but we also put particulates up into the atmosphere that serve as something of a blanket to keep incoming solar radiation, incoming sunlight from striking the Earth. So we're doing two things at the same time. We're putting up particulates, most notably aerosols and sulfate from burning low-quality coal. And those particulates serve as an umbrella over the planet. They reflect incoming sunlight. So it's not nearly as warm as it would otherwise be because we're simultaneously cooling ourselves and baking ourselves to death. It's really paradoxical. In addition to putting up those particulates, we also put up methane and carbon dioxide and ozone and chlorofluorocarbons and all these other greenhouse gases that trap the heat that does get through and traps the long wave radiation and prevents it from going back out. So there's two things going on at once. And the earlier research indicates that the absence of global dimming, when it disappears, will be 1.2 plus or minus 0.2 degrees Celsius. This is from a paper in late 2011 by James Hansen and colleagues. Since then, two additional papers have demonstrated that paper was conservative, and so they indicate up to 3 degrees Celsius global average temperature rise when the particulates fall out. How quickly do the particulates fall out? In a few days. If we turn off the switch of civilization at the world level, as soon as I'm done speaking today, so that, I have this going on. If we wait until I'm done, and we turn off the switch of civilization, within 3 days, the planet will heat up between 1 and 3 degrees Celsius. If we add that on to the other feedbacks mentioned in the Skeptical Science paper and moistening the upper troposphere, forget about the other 63 self-reinforcing feedback loops. That takes us to 6 to 8 degrees Celsius above today. And currently we're at 15 degrees Celsius. We're about right here. At the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we were at 13.5 degrees Celsius. Ice Age is 12 degrees. Hothouse Earth is 22 degrees. Notice 22 degrees, or Jurassic Park, or Hothouse Earth, is where the planet has spent most of its time in the last 2 billion years. So there appear to be very few stable states over long periods of time. This hothouse Earth that exceeded that once during the Great Dying about 252 million years ago got up to about 23 degrees. 6 to 8 degrees above today is somewhere between 21 degrees Celsius and 23 degrees Celsius. There's no date, so it's somewhere in this neighborhood. There's no date put on any of the papers I've come across with respect to moistening the upper troposphere and how quickly it can happen. But equilibrium between moistening of the upper troposphere and global average temperature of the planet is achieved in a few weeks. This is what's called a fast feedback. I would call it a very fast feedback. So once we get that 1 degree C contributed by carbon dioxide, as we already have, then very rapidly we're going to observe a global average rise in temperature. And that might be why the global average temperature increased from 1 degree Celsius in September of last year to 4 months later, 1.57. This could be a contributing factor. I don't know that anybody has made that claim. I don't know. I don't think anybody knows why the temperature is getting so hot so fast at the global level. But whether it's truly kicked in or not, we're headed in a very short period of time to hothouse Earth, plus or minus a degree. It's not that we're not clever. We are very clever. Our bodies will experience a much greater range in temperature than 12 degrees C to 22 degrees C every day. We come from outside, we come inside, boom, we're already 6 to 8 C above where we started when we were outside. That's only, what is that, 10 degrees, which is the range here. 10 degrees Celsius is 18 degrees Fahrenheit. That's nothing. You get up at 60 degrees, later in the day it's 78. None of that's particularly uncomfortable even. So what the issue is here is habitat. It's how does global average rise in temperature affects other species. A recent study indicates that the ability of organisms to keep up with the slow change in global average rise of temperature up to 0.85 C, from 0 to 0.85 C above baseline, from 1750 to 2012, the ability of organisms to keep up, to adapt, was outstripped by slow climate change by a factor of 10,000 times. 10,000 times. So if other species can't keep up, it doesn't really matter how clever we are, because we still got nothing to eat. At this kind of temperature in this short a period of time, I can't imagine there will be a tree on the planet long before we get to that point, because of the inability to adapt. Okay, question?
Can you just describe that last section there where it says today and last so many years?
Yeah, this is the Pleistocene. Sorry, I can't find a decent graph, and I'm a terrible graphic artist. So humans appeared, something resembling humans appeared in about this time span. Much more recently. This is 2 billion years, right? And so the genus Homo appeared 2.8 million years ago, which is, what is that, approximately 1/100th of this time, of this whole scale. So very, very recently. So this is actually expanded. The Pleistocene has expanded, because it's only, Pleistocene has occurred only within the last 2 million years or so.
So where's the temperature today?
Temperature today, well, this is baseline. Okay, so this is 13.5 degrees C. We handle cold really well. We've survived through many ice ages because we are able to clothe ourselves and build fires and that sort of thing. We're currently at about 15 degrees C, about right here. And we're headed for here in the not too distant future, which is a huge change, the kind of change that has occurred relatively abruptly in the past. But bear in mind, this one took somewhere between 20 and 80,000 years. And it's called the Great Dying, and more than 90% of the species on the planet went extinct during that 20 to 80,000 years. And we're talking about something occurring in a few years, not decades, not centuries, not millennia. This lasts tens of thousands of years. So it looks like to me that we missed the arc. Yeah, we should have made a different plan, maybe. I've been accused of having no hope, and that's certainly true. Oh, it sounds like you have no hope. Yeah, that's what the guy said in Westbrook, the character in the television show, right? Well, me too. In fact, I think, consistent with Nietzsche's view, hope in reality is the worst of evils, for it extends the torments of man. Hope is wishful thinking. I suspect, were Nietzsche not such a misogynist, he might have included women in that expression too. But that aside, Hope is wishing for an outcome over which we have no agency. Hope and fear are the four-letter words on the twin side of the I can't predict the future coin, so I'm going to wish something turns out better, or I'm going to fear that something is going to turn out worse. It's this lack of agency towards addressing this predicament that got us into this predicament.
I just wondered, do you agree with the, that factory farms are responsible for like 55% of the methane, and what if we close the factory farms down and, you know, wouldn't some of that help or reverse?
Sure, so
But it wouldn't.
industrial agriculture is responsible for about 30% of the methane that we are observing so far, 30% of atmospheric methane. So it's a big deal. So should we be shutting those things down? Well,
Yes.
a couple of things. There's no should. There are things we should have done a long time ago, but
Yeah.
we're not in charge of should. I don't know if you noticed that. When they do a should poll, my name never comes up. And so, could we have done things differently? Of course, absolutely. And people ask me all the time, when did we take the wrong turn? At what point did we enter the arena of irreversible? Well, I don't know, and I don't think we can know. But as a species, a 200,000-year-old species, Homo sapiens, the wise ape, yes, we actually named ourselves that on paper. The self-proclaimed wise ape for 200,000 years has come to various forks in the road. As near as I can tell, we took the wrong one every time so far. So I'm a big fan of certain actions. I think the situation is hopeless for humans, and I think consistent with the lines of Edward Abbey, action is the antidote to despair. That's not the one I have on the screen, I know that. You're looking at it like, he's not reading that very well. You think a professor could read better than that. And he also said sentiment without action is the ruin of the soul. And he was an atheist, so he meant soul in the more general sense than some people think. So I think we should act. I think we should act and not be attached to the outcome of that action. I think that we should take what Buddhists call right action and be liberated from those right actions turning out to be the right way, which again is a Buddhist-inspired approach. Because I think we're in a predicament and it's insoluble and we're not going to fix this. But I don't think it's about us.
I think insoluble refers to something that's not solution.
Yeah, it has two meanings.
I think the word is unsolvable.
Okay, I'll use unsolvable if you prefer.
Yeah.
That'd be fine with me.
Well, if there's nothing we can do,
This is the question I get every time. Please speak up.
well, what exactly, what are we supposed to do?
What are we supposed to do? Almost nobody asks me that anymore. It's been 7 years and 17 days since I left active service at the university, and there's nobody asking me what we ought to do. What I do, consistent with the referee journal literature since late 2009, when we've known that only collapse of civilization prevents runaway climate change. Well, we now know, based on much more evidence, that we've triggered runaway climate change, regardless. So I don't think it's about us. I don't think it's about the self-proclaimed wise ape, Homo sapiens. Actually, Homo sapiens, sapiens, just to rub it in. We're doubly wise by our own proclamation. I'm interested in preserving habitat for other species. I think we're done in the not too distant future. And whether you believe that or not, if you think we're going to persist for a few more thousand years, then fine, we still need all those other species to support our lives. You know, what do you think we eat? What do you think we drink? Who do you think provides that water that we drink? The clean water that we drink is provided by a bunch of organisms that so far we're trying to cause the extinction of. So let's make it about them instead of us for a change. And what that means is terminating civilization.
There was the nature show on PBS. There was one where it was all about the beavers, and it called them the nature's engineers. And I think it was Nevada, where beavers came back to an area and they brought the whole ecosystem back. Birds came back, the water was flowing again because the cattle drank all the water. And people, I think it's our greed. There was a movie that called us, I don't know, a fungus on the earth or something like that. And it is our greed that's destroying everything. And there was another show on Nova where they talked about Yellowstone to the Yukon, that they're trying to connect all the state parks so that the animals can migrate because they're
the rewilding project is what
What's
that's
it called?
Rewilding.
Rewilding.
Rewilding
Okay.
project.
Yeah.
Google will tell you all about that.
Okay.
Yeah, so there are many things that we could be doing differently, but as nearly as I can tell, the mantra of civilization, of the way we live, the mantra is must go faster.
Say it again.
Must go faster.
What does that mean?
That's our mantra. That's what we do. That's
More-
all of
more
civilization
faster.
is, civilization has two speeds, must go faster and dead. Because as Edward Abbey pointed out a long time ago, I'm going to paraphrase here, civilization, like an airplane in flight, moves forward, no, remains aloft only as it is moving forward. So civilization has to proceed ever faster. We have to get better and faster toys. We have to ensure economic growth. And even a 0.1% economic growth when compounded over time means that we outstrip the ability of the planet to respond in the very near future. But that's what we do because that's what civilization drives us to do, is this must go faster mentality. Think about how dire the news is when we're in a recession. When we have a short period of negative economic conditions. You'd think we were all going to die that week, for what you see on MSNBC, because the economy slowed a little bit. It was no longer going faster, growing all the time. Yeah.
I had a question. I've been studying environmental science now for 40 years, way too many degrees with absolutely no way of having an outlet to actually use, apply my knowledge. But since I got really burned out and jaded many years ago, I left school way back when everybody was talking about the carrying capacity, and it was all very population oriented. But now I'm wondering, can you really speak of numbers, changes in the correlation that not only is the exponential growth rate causing such a severe effect, but it's the increasing way that we consume and are not mindful of our waste, in terms of our technological practices that have changed over the last 4 decades.
Yeah, my co-host and I, Mike Sleva, and I interviewed somebody on the radio show today. We have a radio show every week called Nature Bats Last. And I did it on the train, on the Amtrak on the way down here. That was a pretty unpleasant experience. You'd think in Southern California you'd get a decent cell signal all the damn time, but not so much. So I'm calling on my phone, I kept getting cut every time I had a question. Anyway, our guest today, Ronnie Dam, has focused on human population, overpopulation for a long time, and points to it as the elephant in the room that we're unwilling to address. And I believe that it's a symptom of civilization. So we identify all these, quote, problems, like too many people being added to the planet, more than 200,000 people a day, plus minus deaths every single day. But that's a symptom. It's a symptom of civilization, along with fouling the air and dirtying the water and washing the soil into the ocean and driving to extinction 150 to 200 species a day. In addition to all that, we're also putting more people on the planet who are consuming more all the time. All these are symptoms of civilization. This is what every civilization has ever done in the few thousand years civilizations have been on the planet. For 2.8 million years of the genus Homo, we didn't do that. For 200,000, 194 or so thousand years of the genus Homo, we didn't do that. It's only been within the last few thousand years that civilizations arose, half a dozen times approximately, on the planet at about the same time a few thousand years ago. And each version of civilization is the must go faster version. So I think we keep identifying symptoms and calling them problems. And we aren't getting to the root. We aren't taking a radical approach. That's what radical means, is to get to the root. We aren't getting to the root of our predicament, which is civilization itself. So, you might ask, and people have, now what? Now that even the guy in the newsroom says it's hopeless, now that we can't turn this thing around, even if we started 10 years ago, or 20, or maybe 7,000, now what? Well, I propose doing the things that we could have been doing, if I were to use words like should, I would say should have been doing, which is pursuing love and pursuing the life of excellence. And you get to define those, that's the best part about it. If you love power, well, I'm not a big fan, but maybe that's what you love more than anything, so maybe you could pursue that. If you love the people in your life, the 10 or 20 or 50 people that you actually influence every day or every week, then maybe you should focus on them. Maybe you should treat them with the kind of respect that you like to be treated with. Maybe you should practice creativity and compassion with not only human beings, but other beings on the planet. And then a life of excellence, you know, Socrates was either a figment of Plato's imagination, or he actually went around asking people the same 6 questions until they killed him. And the 6 questions were targeted towards how to pursue a life of excellence. Socrates did not say, and I'm not saying, live a life of excellence, because that's impossible. We can pursue a life of excellence, but to get there is an apex beyond flawed humans, I'm afraid. So Socrates just asked the same 6 questions in pursuit of a life of excellence. What is courage? What is good? What is justice? What is moderation? What is piety? What is virtue? 6 questions over and over and over again for about 50 years until they killed him. I should be so lucky. Reminds me of one of my classes, many years ago, I asked what was Socrates' most famous line? And I'm thinking about the life not worth living thing, right? Because I thought most people knew about